Hi, this is Gabe from FluentForever.com. At this point, we've gone through all the sounds of Mandarin. If you're using one of my pronunciation trainers, it's going to take you through all of these sounds, train your ears to hear them more accurately, and teach you the spellings that produce them. Then it will push all that data into your long-term memory. And if you're not, that's fine too. I made these videos to give you a passing familiarity with all the sounds of Mandarin, so that when you study them in depth, they're going to feel more familiar. That'll make them easier to learn. In either case, I want to show you some peculiarities of Mandarin's Pinyin alphabet that should make the spelling system, which is generally pretty straightforward, a little more sensible. We'll talk about 4 topics. First, we'll go through 4 finals that aren't quite spelled the way they're pronounced. Then we'll talk about how Pinyin works when there's no initial consonant. We'll go through the finals that start with the letter U, and then we'll talk about how the letter I behaves. So let's get started. As I mentioned back in video 1, a Mandarin syllable has 2 parts, an initial and a final.
Giving you syllables like ma, xiong, chuang, nue. Now 3 of Mandarin's finals are you, wei, and wen.
But almost every time you encounter these finals, they're going to drop their middle letter.
That gives you words like jiu, shui, and cun. You'll encounter a similar sort of letter dropping with the final wo. When it shows up after a B, P, M, or F, it drops the U, giving you bo, po, mo, fo.
But you'll only drop that U with those 4 initial consonants. Everywhere else, you'll see it spelled out in full.
You'll see that in huo, 美国, zhuo.
Our next topic is the 0 initial. This is what happens when instead of starting with an initial consonant, you pronounce the final on its own.
Instead of syllables like ma, xiong, chuang, and nue, you're looking at a, yong, wang, and yue.
These so-called 0 initial syllables have a few pretty straightforward spelling rules. Basically, if a final begins with an I, a U, or a U with a couple of dots over it, and you're trying to make a 0 initial syllable, then the spelling is going to change as follows. Anytime you see an I at the beginning of a final, replace it with a Y.
So the finals ya, yao, and yang are spelled Y-A, Y-A-O, and Y-A-N-G.
Anytime you see a U at the beginning of a final, replace it with a W.
So the finals wa, y, and wang are spelled W-A, W-A-I, and W-A-N-G.
And anytime you see a U with umlauts at the beginning of a final, replace it with Y-U.
So the finals yu, yue, and yuan are spelled Y-U, Y-U-E, and Y-U-A-N.
Otherwise, the final is going to be written the way it's usually written. There are a few exceptions, but they all make a lot of sense. There are a few circumstances where there's only one vowel, for instance, as in
u, i, in, ing.
In these cases, you're going to add a W or a Y to the beginning instead of just replacing the vowel entirely. Instead of this, you'll see this. The only other spots where the 0 initial is spelled a little differently from the syllables that have initials is for the first 3 finals we discussed in the beginning of this video.
The finals you, wen, and wei.
While you'll drop the middle letter in those finals when they have initial consonants, when it's a 0 initial, you don't do that.
Giving you you, wen, and wei.
And that's it for exceptions. So we have 2 topics left, and then we're through. First, let's talk about the 4 finals that start with U.
Yu, yue, yuan, and yun.
These finals are some of the rarest in Mandarin, in that they only work with 5 of the initials, N, L, J, Q, and X. With N and L, they act the way all the other finals act. You take your initial, you add on a final, and you get your syllable.
Nu, nue, lu, yue.
But with the other 3 consonants, J, Q, and X, you'll spell that final a little differently. You don't write the 2 dots over that U.
That gives you syllables like ju, xue, xuan, jun.
But this seems like it should cause some problems.
If you run into a final like UAN, how do you know when to pronounce it as wan? And how do you know when to pronounce it as yuan?
The simple answer is to just pay attention to the initial consonants.
If you're looking at a J, a Q, or an X followed by a U, then you're looking at one of the 4 U finals. If you're looking at some other consonant followed by a U, then it's a plain old U.
Some of the logic behind this rule is that these 3 consonants force your tongue all the way up and into the front of your mouth, basically leaving your tongue in the position of E and U. it would take a really drastic, almost impossible to manage change in your tongue position to say any of those consonants and then switch all the way over to an oo vowel.
And so, that combination doesn't exist in Mandarin. You're never going to say shu or chuan because it's just too hard to say.
So if you see one of those consonants, the next vowel is guaranteed to be some sort of E or U vowel. And that brings us to our last topic, the three pronunciations of the final I.
Generally, a single I is pronounced E, as in E or Li.
There are two circumstances where that can change.
The first one is when that final shows up with the consonants zhi, chi, shi, r.
These consonants all have a similar tongue position. You're flattening your tongue in the back and pulling the tip of your tongue back away from your teeth and a bit up towards the roof of your mouth.
This tongue position is really far away from E, and so instead of doing crazy things with your tongue, you keep it still and pronounce r. So ZHI, CHI, SHI, and RI are pronounced zhi, chi, shi, and r. The second spot where the I final isn't pronounced E is after S, Z, and C. These three consonants all end in the same sound, s.
And if you recall from our second video, s shows up in Mandarin with a slightly different tongue position than it is in English. The tip of the tongue touches your bottom teeth, and the back of your tongue is high up in the back of your mouth, basically in the same position as oo, except your lips aren't rounded.
So once again, instead of making a sudden and drastic shift in tongue position, you'll just stay where you are, with your tongue up and back in your mouth, giving you s, z, c.
And that's it for Pinyin spelling rules. To quickly review, we went over 4 groups of rules. First, we covered a few finals that are pronounced a little differently from how they're spelled.
Namely you, wei, and wen, which are spelled without their middle letter, as in jiu, shui, and cun. And we covered wo, which drops its u when it shows up in front of b, p, m, or f, as in bo, po, mo, and fo. Then we talked about zero initial syllables, which sound like a, yong, wang, and yue, and are spelled like this.
Basically, you just replace all I's, U's, and U with umlauts with Y's, W's, and YU's, respectively. This had a couple of exceptions. For single lone vowels, you'll add a Y or a W instead of replacing the vowel,
forming u, yi, yin, or ying. And for the 3 finals we discussed earlier, yo, wei, and wen, you don't drop the middle letter like you usually do and spell them like this, yo, wei, wen. We then talked about yu and how after the consonants J, Q, and X, you just use a normal U rather than a U with an umlaut over it. And last, we talked about the 3 pronunciations of the I final and how it's pronounced E most of the time, R when it comes in front of the consonants shi, zhi, chi, and r, and when it comes in front of s, z, and s.
And with that, we've covered the entire Mandarin pronunciation system. If you need a hand in memorizing this stuff and training your ears to hear it, then grab a Mandarin trainer from my website linked below. You'll have all of this memorized within a few weeks. I'll see you next time.